you, Jerome, and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. And I'm very pleased to give you a further introduction to Eric Liu, who is an author, educator, and civic entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Citizen University, which works to create a stronger culture of citizenship, and which we'll be talking about a little bit more later. He's a former White House speechwriter for President Bill Clinton and was later the president's deputy domestic policy advisor. After the White House, he was an executive at the digital media company Real Networks. In 2002, Eric was named one of the World Economic Forum's Global Leaders of Tomorrow. He co-authored the national bestseller, The Gardens of Democracy, a new American story of citizenship, the economy, and the role of government. He has written or co-written several other books, including The True Patriot and Imagination First, Unlocking the Power of Possibility. His latest book is entitled A Chinaman's Chance, One Family's Journey and the Chinese-American Dream. Please join me in welcoming Eric Liu.
Thank you. Thanks, Monica.
So, of course, a question begs to be answered. Why the title A Chinaman's Chance?
Well, first of all, Mary Kay, thank you for having this conversation, and thanks to the World Affairs Council and Asia Society here for gathering us together today. I am really excited to talk about this book and this title in particular. The phrase "a Chinaman's chance," I think many people know, is a phrase that has fallen into both disrepute and out of use. It is a slur, in essence, and a phrase that has its origins really from the earliest days when Chinese immigrants first began to arrive here in the United States, and laborers from China were given some of the most thankless, dangerous, life-threatening jobs in laying the railroads, mining the mountains, and so forth, such that they often had a slim to no chance of surviving, which got shorthanded in the language of the time as a Chinaman's chance of surviving. And ironically, that phrase long survived its original usage. And by the time 100+ years later, when my father emigrated to the United States in the late 1950s, my dad, as a real sponge for language and idiom, as well as somebody with this kind of ironic, playful sense of humor, somewhere along the way, he heard the phrase. He probably heard it used either against him or used kind of unthinkingly in his company and presence. It was my father's nature to take something like that, where the intention was to wound, and to grab that dart in midair and basically redirect it. And so what he began to do was just in this kind of ironically playful way, reappropriate and claim that phrase, a Chinaman's chance, such that when I was growing up as a kid, he would apply it in this sort of silly way to just everyday prosaic situations, right? If we were trying to get to the grocery store before closing time, but we were still 15 minutes away, he'd say, "Oh, Eric, we have a Chinaman's chance of getting there on time." Or if the Yankees were down by 5 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning, he'd say, "Oh, they've got a Chinaman's chance of coming back here." And he said it in this way that was, I think, as he did many things, intended to, in Chinese the word is "dou," to kind of poke and prod me and almost kind of to try to get my goat, basically, like to use this phrase, which was so A, archaic, and B, kind of patently offensive, to see if he could get a rise out of me. And he enjoyed this.
Did he?
He didn't, because what he actually ended up doing, I think, which perhaps was his deeper intention, was to teach ways in which we can reclaim and reappropriate language. And that part of claiming Americanness is to take these words and phrases and slurs and ideas that are meant to be used against us and to say, we detoxify them. We detoxify them by grabbing them ourselves and using them in ways that we dictate the terms of and that make sense for the context that we have today. And that's part of a bigger process of us claiming voice. And so it's partly to honor my dad's spirit that I named the book A Chinaman's Chance. The other piece of it, though, is just about the idea of chance and opportunity. We were talking before we came out here, Mary Kay, about how this moment, the book that Mary Kay is working on here, we live in this age of China and America, an age actually often cast as China versus America, and an age where here in the United States, because of income inequality and wealth concentration, because of all of this churning social and demographic change, our sense of opportunity is beginning to diminish, and our sense of relative opportunity is certainly beginning to diminish in comparison to China. And part of what I'm writing this book about is to remind us as Americans about the meaning of opportunity here in the United States and what it means to have a chance to express your full potential, to have a chance to have your voice heard, to have a chance to redefine what it means to be American. And that's really a lot of what the storytelling and the arguments of the book are about.
Yeah. It's also, a lot of it is about identity and how you construct your own identity. All of us have multiple identities. You know, we have identities related to our work, to our passions, to our gender, to our relationships, to our religion, our ethnicity, our citizenship. When you were growing up, where on the spectrum was your, in the sense of how you constructed your identity or thought of your identity, was being American and being Chinese? How important was that to you in terms of how you thought of yourself, and how did others see you? And did you feel that there was sort of a gap between those?
I would add a third point to triangulate these senses of identity, and that's Asian. And
Right.
so I want to speak to all of this. I think you're absolutely right that every one of us has many identities, right? And when you think about that, you realize the ways in which we as Americans often conflate the two words heritage and identity. We use them to mean the same thing, but they're not the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. I have a Chinese heritage. I am the recipient, the trustee, the inheritor of this legacy of Chinese culture and civilization. And I've done at best a middling job of kind of holding on to that legacy and trying to pass it on to a third generation. But that's distinct from identity, of how one identifies oneself and what one takes and constructs in putting together that sense of self, right? And so today when asked, what are you, right, in that most basic sense that...
What are you or who are you?
Yeah, but I think people of color get what are you, perhaps more often. You know, what are you? My answer is Chinese American. And I hasten to add, I do not hyphenate Chinese American. Chinese space American. American is the noun. Chinese is the adjective. Chinese is actually one of many adjectives that I can, you know, I'm a baseball-loving American. I'm a, you know, politically active American. All these different adjectives. But the Chinese part of my Americanness looms rather large, right? And so growing up, you know, I would say that as a kid, actually, I had this wonderful sense that Chineseness and Americanness could be aligned and overlapping. And part of that is not just, oh, isn't that nice? Part of it was the active will of a second-generation kid trying to make sense of things, trying to create unity and integrity out of these different streams of heritage and identity that were surrounding him. And so, you know, I grew up with stories of my paternal grandfather, who was a pilot and later a general in the nationalist Chinese Air Force, fought in the Sino-Japanese War, later in the war against the communists. And though I never knew him, I heard legends and stories of him. I knew him by his very severe portrait in uniform looking down at me. And his name in Mandarin is Liu Guoyun. And as you know, Liu is the family name, but Guoyun basically means deliverance of the nation. So, you know, no pressure, right? My grandfather had this huge name to live up to. And in many ways he did. He had the good fortune, I suppose, to come of age at a time when dynastic rule was ending and the Republic of China was emerging, and he could participate in those very crowded, consequential years of Chinese history. And so growing up, I had all these stories of World War II, stories in which Americans and Chinese were on the same side, in which, and indeed, my grandfather worked with the Flying Tigers, right, the group of sort of semi-official American mercenary pilots who helped the cause of the nationalists. And so I had these kind of legends in my mind that to be American and to be Chinese were, in some sense, overlapping, right? Now, there were, of course, limits to that. And the limits were the limits once I left my imagination and once I left the safety of my home and my family, right? And you go out into the wider world. I grew up in a part of upstate New York in the Hudson Valley that was a fantastic, idyllic place to grow up, but not particularly diverse. You know, incredibly white community, and I went to a school that was largely white. And so I was very aware growing up of my difference, right? And difference was cast not so much in Chinese terms, but in Asian terms, right? And so the sense that you are not white like everybody else, you are something else, and the something else is this kind of indiscriminate lumping you know, I don't know if you're Chinese or Japanese or Korean or what,